Hey everyone, sorry about the lighting and the echo in here. This isn't where I normally record. Just wanted to quickly do a video on something that caused a little bit of confusion when it comes to the APUs. This is once again the 4750G, as you got from the title. And from the title, we're talking about VRAM. First of all, what is VRAM? It is essentially just RAM dedicated for video purposes, so anything that the GPU has exclusive access to. That could be physically on the graphics card, could be GDDR, could be DVR, could be just an ordinary sticker RAM like this. At the end of the day, it's just DRAM that's ring fenced for video purposes. Had someone recently try and tell me that DRAM and VRAM are different, which is confusing because it's all DRAM in this context anyway. There are of course other types of RAM than DRAM, but all of it's DRAM when it comes to graphics cards and this kind of RAM. But enough of that. The question is there any point in setting your VRAM for an APU? Why not just leave it as default, auto, which is about 512 normally? Or do you want to set it as high as you can? Does it make a difference in performance? Well, I'll show you that it does and it doesn't. There is a reason why it exists, and it's generally resolution based stuff, and some applications require stuff to be in VRAM, so it might store it in RAM, but then it will transfer it to VRAM before it can do anything with it. And even though it's on the same stick of memory, the software doesn't know the difference. So it's transferring it from there to there and back again, just so we can work with it. So there is times when having dedicated VRAM makes a difference. Some games complain if you haven't got enough, and other games seem to recognise that it is using virtual memory and gives you a limit according to it. Doom Eternal is a good example. Never used to, but it does now. And another thing, when I first did this with the 4350G with a different board, I found that when I was messing around with the settings, the board would jump back to 512 meg VRAM, but that was only when I had CMS turned on. Don't know why that makes a difference, but it did, and it kept jumping back to 512, and I was getting some strange performance issues, as you can see here, where this was the Final Fantasy 15 benchmark. It ran very poorly. At the time I thought I made a mistake and it was the APU. I then realised later that in fact my VRAM was set low. Now interestingly, I will show it now with 16 gig of VRAM, and you can see it's running better. But with the 4750G, with the latest drivers, here it is again with 512 meg VRAM. As you can see, the 16 and the 512 basically the same. Now here's a quick graph showing the comparison between the different amounts of VRAM and the Final Fantasy 15 benchmark. And as you can see, something interesting happens. It's not much difference between them in terms of the actual performance, but when the VRAM increases we get slightly better performance until we hit 16 gig, at which point I think the machine is lacking RAM to run the benchmark properly, which is why it drops back down. So it has made a slight difference, which is interesting. It's a similar story with the Final Fantasy 14 benchmark. This game itself requires a lot less VRAM, only about 1.5 gig at most. And as you can see, as we increase the VRAM, we get slightly better performance until we hit about 8 gig, at which point it starts dropping. So it's a similar kind of thing with the Final Fantasy 14 benchmark, which once again is interesting. Okay, benchmarks are fun and all, but let's look at a game like Mafia. Here we get absolutely no difference at all between all the different settings of VRAM. 2 gig had for some reason a blip in min, but who cares? That's just an outlier, but overall it's exactly the same. So that might just be because it's a low frame rate anyway, so we can't really see the difference. But VRAM doesn't seem to make any difference in this game in particular, especially on this chip. Okay, how about a game like Doom Eternal that is very VRAM heavy? Here we're running on, once again, all the settings, 16 gig down to 512. It makes a little bit of a difference. We get a few extra frames here and there, so the average is slightly higher as you go up. Once you hit 16 gig, it starts to dip again a bit, but there is a slight difference. Max FPS is increasing across the board, so that's interesting. So the extra VRAM does seem to make a very slight difference, mainly because maybe it's just swapping stuff in and out, and it's able to manage it slightly better with more dedicated RAM for itself. But yeah, it makes a slight difference. Nothing major, but it's interesting to see. Okay, well, I found that interesting. It was a little different to what I expected. I expected the VRAM to make more of a difference overall, and in some static benchmarks it does seem to make a difference. Because the way VRAM works, you generally have to swap things into VRAM for them to be accessed, and certain applications handle that differently, and it gets a bit complicated. But I did find that if I had the VRAM set very low, because I use the CPU for my work machine and for rendering videos, if I set it below 2 gig, I would have issues with VRAM not rendering stuff. So some applications do it fine, some don't. So I'll leave that about 2 gig for myself. Of course, every application varies. I would say if you are finding you are getting poor performance in something, and it's on auto or 512, let's say, increase it a bit if you've got some spare RAM. Give the video card a little bit more ring-fenced RAM for itself, and you might find the performance increase, or you get a better stability. Of course, feel free to disagree. People seem to have very mixed opinions on these particular APUs. I think they're great. It's nice to see strong onboard graphics at a low power consumption, which I think we need more of personally. But that's all we have to say for today. So like, dislike, subscribe, all that nonsense. Leave comments below. Any questions, I'll try and answer them. But I'm not an absolute expert on this. I only observe what I can see. And all I can say is the latest drivers seem to have made a difference regarding this. Much better than what it was when I first started using this chip, which is good. But it also means that my assumptions were completely wrong. I'll be leaving this at 4 gig going forward for most of my benchmarking tests, because it seems to be a sweet spot. But beyond that, that's all really. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. So until then, goodbye.